Clearing out my childhood home felt like a funeral, until I found a camera that developed more than just old photos. It developed horrors, dripping from the very walls, pulling me into my grandfather's darkest secret. It all started with the smell of dust and forgotten time. My parents had finally sold the house I grew up in, a 2-story colonial that had held every memory I owned within its creaking frame. They'd given me one last weekend to go through my old things in the attic before the new owners took possession. I wasn't looking forward to it. It felt less like a trip down memory lane and more like presiding over a funeral. The attic was exactly as I remembered it, a sweltering, dimly lit cavern under the eaves, crammed with the ghosts of forgotten Christmases and the corpses of obsolete technology. Motes of dust danced in the single sunbeam slicing through the grimy porthole window. My mission was simple: sort everything into 3 piles: keep, donate, trash. Most of it was trash. Old school projects, broken toys, clothes I wouldn't have been caught dead in, even when they were in style. I was about to give up for the day when my foot snagged on the corner of an old leather trunk tucked away behind a stack of my dad's vinyl records. It was my grandfather's. He'd passed away when I was 10, and I barely remembered him, but I remembered my dad solemnly placing this trunk in the attic and telling me it was full of his adventures. I'd never had the guts to open it before. It felt like trespassing on sacred ground. But now the house was being sold. It was now or never. The brass latches groaned in protest, but they gave way. Inside, nestled among yellowed maps, a worn naval uniform, and a compass that still pointed north, was a camera. It was a strange, heavy thing, nothing like the sleek digital cameras I was used to. It was made of cold, black metal, wrapped in cracked, dark brown leatherette. On the front, in faded silver script, were the words, Argentalux. The lens was a milky, unsettling white, like a blind eye. It felt ancient, like something that had witnessed things it shouldn't have. Curiosity got the better of me. I fumbled with a latch on the side, and the back popped open. To my astonishment, it wasn't empty. A film cartridge, thick and blocky, was still lodged inside. A small dial on the cartridge read 310. 3 pictures already taken. 7 left. On a whim, I snapped the back shut. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the suffocating nostalgia of the house, the feeling of my childhood being boxed up and sold to strangers. I wanted to capture it, to preserve the emptiness before it was filled with someone else's life. I raised the Argentalux, the viewfinder a blurry, distorted circle, and pointed it at the cluttered attic. I pressed the shutter. There was no modern, polite click. Instead, a loud, mechanical ker-chunk echoed in the silence, followed by a brilliant, blinding flash of white light that made me see spots. A low whirring sound started, and a thick square piece of photo paper, completely white, slid out of a slot on the top. It looked like an old Polaroid, but the paper felt thicker, heavier, and it was just blank. A perfect, sterile white. I figured the film was 1,000 years old and had long since expired. Still, I had 6 shots left. I went downstairs. I stood in the doorway of my old bedroom, now stripped of its posters and personality. The faint outline of where my bed used to be was still visible on the scuffed hardwood floor. Ker-chunk. Flash. Another blank white square slid out. I went to the living room, where we'd set up the Christmas tree every year, now just a cavernous space with faded patches on the wallpaper where pictures once hung. Ker-chunk. Flash. A third blank. I kept going, a strange compulsion driving me. The kitchen, the backyard with its lonely, tireless swing set, the front porch. I used up every last shot, creating a small stack of 7 perfectly white, perfectly useless squares of photo paper. I felt a pang of disappointment. For a moment, I'd let myself believe in a little magic. Just a cool-looking paperweight, I thought, tossing the camera and the blank photos onto the nightstand in the guest room where I was staying. I collapsed into bed, emotionally and physically drained, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, and for a blissful few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then the weight of the empty house settled back on me. I rolled over, my eyes landing on the nightstand, and my heart stopped. The little stack of photos wasn't white anymore. I sat bolt upright, my blood turning to ice. They were no longer blank. They were developed. I snatched the top one. It was the picture I took in the attic. But it wasn't the dusty, cluttered attic I had seen yesterday. It was vibrant, alive. In the photo, a much younger version of my dad was standing where I had stood, smiling, holding up a gleaming trumpet. I recognized it as the one he'd played in his high school marching band. My stomach did a slow, nauseous flip. This wasn't just a developed photo. This was a memory. This was a moment in time I had never witnessed. My hands trembled as I picked up the next one, the living room. But it wasn't empty. A huge, brightly lit Christmas tree stood in the corner, a mountain of presents underneath. A tiny version of me, maybe 5 years old, was sitting on the floor in dinosaur pajamas, gleefully tearing open a gift. I could see my mom in the background, a warm, tired smile on her face as she held a mug of coffee. I could almost smell the pine needles and the cinnamon from her baking. I flipped through them faster and faster, each photo a window into a past I'd either forgotten or never even known. The kitchen, with my grandmother, who I'd lost years ago, rolling out dough on the counter. The backyard, with me and my sister, who now lived across the country, having a water balloon fight. Each image was impossibly crisp, impossibly real. It was magic. Beautiful, heartbreaking magic. Then I got to the last photo, the one I took of my own empty bedroom. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the corner. I took a deep breath and turned it over. At first it looked exactly as I'd expected. The empty room, the scuffed floors, the faint outline of where my bed had been. It was the only photo that seemed to show the present. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was premature. I looked closer. Something was wrong. On the wall, next to the window, was a handprint. It was dark, glistening, and perfectly clear, like it had been made with fresh tar or black paint. 5 jagged fingers pressed against the pale, yellow wallpaper. I never put a handprint there. I would have remembered something like that. My blood ran cold as I stared at it, the impossibly dark shape in the otherwise normal photograph. But that wasn't the worst part. As I held it, my eyes fixed on the image, I saw something that couldn't be happening. The top finger of the handprint, a single, thick droplet was forming at its tip. And as I stared, my heart hammering against my ribs, that droplet elongated, detached, and began a slow, silent crawl down the glossy surface of the photograph. I dropped the photo as if it had burned me. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, landing face up. From where I stood, the small dark smudge on the wall in the picture was just a speck, but I knew what it was doing. I knew it was still moving. My breath came in ragged gasps. This was impossible. It had to be a trick of the light, some weird chemical reaction in the ancient photo paper. That had to be it. I was sleep-deprived, emotional, and my mind was playing tricks on me in this mausoleum of a house. I backed away slowly, my eyes still glued to the small white square on the floor, and fled the room, slamming the door behind me as if I could trap the impossibility inside. I spent the next hour in the kitchen, chugging water straight from the tap, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tried to reason with myself. There's no such thing as a haunted photograph. The droplet was an illusion. The handprint was just a weird smudge, a flaw in the film. It was all a coincidence. But no matter how many rational explanations I built up in my head, the image of that black tear oozing down the picture kept tearing them down. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I had to see the wall for myself. My footsteps echoed unnervingly as I climbed the stairs back to the second floor. My old bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, my hand trembling so badly I could barely grip the brass knob. The room was just as I'd left it, empty, sad, and drenched in the morning sun. I walked straight to the wall next to the window, my eyes scanning the pale yellow paint. Nothing. It was completely clean. Not a smudge, not a mark, not a hint of a handprint. I ran my fingers over the smooth, cool surface, a wave of dizzying relief washing over me. It wasn't real. It was a flaw in the photo, a trick of my mind. I let out a shaky laugh, the sound thin and foreign in the empty space. Feeling emboldened, I went back to the guest room to confront the pictures. They were still on the nightstand, except for the one I'd dropped, which was still on the floor. I picked it up, my hands now steady. The photo of my bedroom. I looked at the wall next to the window. The black handprint was still there, stark and menacing. I looked at the path the droplet had taken. A faint, greasy-looking streak now marred the glossy surface, ending in a tiny, dried-up black speckle about halfway down the wall. It had stopped moving. It had dried. The relief I felt was instantly replaced by a fresh, colder wave of fear. It hadn't been an illusion. It had happened. The substance, whatever it was, had been wet, and now it was dry. My obsession shifted from fear to a desperate, consuming curiosity. What was this camera? What had it captured? I grabbed the heavy black device from the nightstand, the Argentalux. I turned it over and over in my hands. It was just metal and leather. No hidden buttons, no strange dials I hadn't seen before. I opened the back again. The film cartridge was there, the little dial now clearly reading 1010, the counter for the used shots. It was finished. Done. But that number I'd seen when I first found it floated back into my mind. 310. It had said 3 shots were already taken. I had taken 7 photos, from shot number 4 to shot number 10, which meant there were 3 photos I hadn't seen. 3 photos taken by my grandfather. I practically sprinted back up to the attic, my mind racing. Where would he have put them? They weren't just loose in the trunk. I would have seen them. I hauled the heavy leather trunk into the middle of the floor, right under the single dusty sunbeam. I emptied its contents onto the floorboards. The naval uniform, the maps, the compass, a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Nothing. I ran my hands along the inside of the trunk, feeling the worn fabric lining. My fingers brushed against a slight irregularity in the bottom, a seam that didn't feel right. I pressed down, and a section of the floor popped up with a soft click. A false bottom. My heart hammered. Inside the shallow, hidden compartment lay a small, oilskin pouch. With trembling fingers I untied the drawstring and tipped the contents into my palm. 3 photographs. They were the same size and had the same thick, card-like feel as mine, but they were yellowed with age, their corners soft and rounded. The first one was of a young man who I recognized as my grandfather from old family albums. He was standing on the deck of a massive ship, leaning against the rail with a cocky grin, the sea and sky stretching out behind him. It was a happy, normal picture, a slice of a young man's adventure. The second photo made my stomach clench. It was taken on the same ship, but the mood was completely different. The sky was a bruised, stormy purple, and the sea was black and unnaturally still, like polished obsidian. My grandfather was in the frame, but he wasn't smiling. He was looking back over his shoulder, away from the camera, his eyes wide with a look of pure, primal terror. His mouth was open as if in a silent scream. He was looking at something just outside the frame, something that had terrified him. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the third and final photo. I had to force myself to look at it. The image was dark, clearly taken inside the ship, maybe in a cargo hold or an engine room. It was all shadows and pipes and damp-looking metal walls. For a second, I thought it was just a black, underexposed mess. But then my eyes adjusted. In the center of the frame, illuminated by what must have been the camera's flash, was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs long and jointed like a spider's. It was hunched over, its head cocked at an impossible angle. I couldn't make out a face, just a pale, smooth surface where a face should be. And then I saw it. One of its long, spindly arms was stretched out, and its hand, a hand with 5 jagged, needle-like fingers, was pressed flat against a metal bulkhead. It was the same hand, the exact same hand from the photo of my bedroom. A sick, dizzying sense of vertigo washed over me. This thing. My grandfather had seen it. He had captured it with this camera, and somehow, decades later, its mark had appeared in a photo of my room. As I stared, horrified, into the dark photograph, I realized the figure wasn't just standing there. Its blank, featureless face was turned ever so slightly, aimed directly at the lens, It was looking right at me. A sudden, intense cold flooded the attic, raising goosebumps all over my skin. I heard a sound from downstairs, a faint scraping noise against the floorboards of the guest room, right where I'd left the other photos. It sounded like a fingernail, long and sharp, dragging slowly across wood. My blood turned to ice. The scraping sound came again, longer this time, a deliberate scree that grated on my nerves and made the tiny hairs on my arms stand up. It was coming from the guest room, from where the photos were. I was paralyzed, crouched on the attic floorboards, the 3 yellowed pictures clutched in my hand. My grandfather's terror, captured in faded monochrome, suddenly felt incredibly fresh, incredibly close. He had seen this thing, and now it was in my house. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of the house and never look back. But I couldn't. The camera, my photos, they were all downstairs. Leaving them felt like leaving a door wide open for whatever that thing was to follow. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I forced myself to move. I placed my grandfather's photos carefully back into the oilskin pouch and slipped it into my pocket. My every movement felt sluggish, as if the air had thickened into molasses. The attic felt like a trap, and the single porthole window seemed impossibly small. I crept towards the attic stairs, my sneakers silent on the dusty wood. Each creak of the old house was amplified, every shadow a lurking threat. The scraping had stopped, and the silence that followed was somehow worse. It was a listening silence. I descended the attic ladder 1 rung at a time, my ears straining. The second-floor hallway was empty, bathed in the deceptive warmth of the afternoon sun. The door to the guest room was still closed, just as I'd left it. I crept towards it, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I pressed my ear against the cool wood of the door. Nothing. Not a sound. Maybe I'd imagined it. Wishful thinking. I slowly, carefully turned the doorknob. The latch clicked with the loudness of a gunshot in the dead quiet. I pushed the door open a crack. The room looked exactly the same. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The bed was unmade, and on the nightstand my stack of 6 photos sat undisturbed. The 7th, the one with the handprint, was still on the floor where I'd left it. Everything was normal. Too normal. I scanned the room, my eyes darting into every corner, every shadow. The closet door was shut. The space under the bed was empty. There was nothing here. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my shoulders slumping with relief. It was my imagination. The stress, the old photos. It was all getting to me. I walked over and knelt down to pick up the photo from the floor. I hesitated for a second before turning it over. The handprint was still there, the dried streak beneath it like a scar. It was just a picture, a creepy, inexplicable picture, but a picture nonetheless. I stood up, placing it on top of the stack on the nightstand. I needed to get these things, and the camera, out of this house. Maybe I'd throw them in a river. Maybe I'd bury them. I didn't know, but I knew I couldn't keep them. As I reached for the Argenta Lux, a glint of something on the floor caught my eye, right next to where the photo had been lying. I bent down. It was a long, deep scratch in the hardwood, a pale gash in the dark varnish. It hadn't been there this morning. It was fresh. The scraping sound hadn't been in my head. A new, colder fear snaked its way up my spine. It hadn't been in the room. It had been under the room. The sound had come from the floorboards. My gaze shot downwards. I was standing on the guest room floor, which was directly above the living room. I bolted out of the room and flew down the main staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. The living room was vast and empty, sunlight pouring in through the large bay windows. I scanned the ceiling, my eyes tracing the lines of the plaster. Nothing seemed out of place, no cracks, no stains. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, a physical pressure on the back of my neck. Then I saw it. In the center of the ceiling, directly below where the guest room was a single, dark spot. It was small, no bigger than a coin, and it looked like a water stain. But it hadn't been raining. I dragged a rickety dining chair from the other room and climbed onto it, my heart pounding. As I got closer, I saw that it wasn't a water stain. It was thick, black, and viscous, like tar, and it was slowly, impossibly, seeping through the plaster and the paint. It was the same substance from the photograph. As I stared, transfixed, a single perfect droplet welled up, quivered for a moment, and then fell, landing with a soft pat on the floorboards, right next to the chair. I scrambled off the chair, stumbling backward, my eyes locked on the growing black stain on the ceiling. It was in the house. It was literally inside the walls, the floors, the very structure of the building. My grandfather hadn't just taken a picture of it on a ship half a world away. He'd brought it home with him. Had it been here all along, dormant, sleeping in the bones of the house? Had I woken it up by using the camera? The question swirled in my head, a hurricane of panic. The camera. It was the key. It captured things that weren't just images. It captured echoes, moments. Maybe it captured the things themselves. I had to get the camera and the pictures. I had to destroy them. I turned to race back up the stairs, but stopped dead. On the bottom steps something was different. Another photograph. It was one of mine, one from the stack I had left on the nightstand upstairs. It was the picture of the kitchen, the one with my grandmother rolling dough. But it wasn't just lying there. It was pinned to the wooden riser of the step by something long, black, and needle-sharp. It looked like a giant thorn or a claw, punched straight through the center of the photograph and deep into the wood. The image of my grandmother was completely obliterated by the point of entry, and oozing from the puncture, a thick, black fluid dripped slowly, methodically, onto the step below. Drip, drip, drip. And from the top of the stairs, in the shadowed hallway, I heard a sound. It wasn't a scrape this time. It was a low, guttural click, like the sound of a spider flexing its legs. The clicking sound echoed from the top of the stairs, a dry, alien noise that rooted me to the spot. My gaze was locked on the defiled photograph of my grandmother, the black ichor dripping from it like a venomous wound. Each drop hitting the step below was a punctuation mark in a message of absolute terror. It was toying with me. It had taken one of my happiest memories and stabbed it, showing me it could touch my past, that it could poison it. The path to the camera, to the other photos, was blocked by whatever was waiting for me in the shadows of the upstairs hall. Panic gave way to a cold, desperate clarity. I couldn't go up, but I couldn't stay here. The stain on the living room ceiling was spreading, a slowly growing eclipse in the center of the room. The house no longer felt like my home. It felt like a cage, a tomb, and the walls were closing in. I backed away from the stairs, my eyes still fixed on the darkness above, and retreated into the dining room. I needed a plan. I needed a weapon. But what do you use to fight a shadow that bleeds through walls? My eyes fell upon my grandfather's trunk, which I'd left in the middle of the room after finding the photos. The camera was the key. It had captured this thing, trapped its essence on paper. Maybe it could do it again, but the camera was upstairs and I was fresh out of film. Or was I? The cartridge had said 10-10. I had taken 7 shots. Grandfather had taken 3. The film was used up. But what if the photos themselves could be used? What if they weren't just a record, but a connection? My hand went to my pocket, to the oilskin pouch. I pulled out my grandfather's 3 photos. The one of him on the ship, smiling, the one of him terrified, and the one of the creature in the ship's hold. As I held the final terrifying picture, an idea, insane and reckless, began to form in my mind. The camera had captured it there, in that dark, metal room. Was a piece of it still trapped in that image? Could I send it back? I heard the clicking again, closer this time. It was descending the stairs. I didn't have time to second-guess myself. I grabbed the trunk and dragged it with a deafening scrape into the center of the living room, directly under the dripping black stain on the ceiling. I threw open the lid. Inside, amongst the maps and the compass, was a small brass tin of lighter fluid and a book of matches my grandfather must have used for a Zippo. My heart leapt. The clicking stopped. It was on the first floor now. I could feel its presence, a palpable drop in temperature in the air around me. I worked frantically, my fingers fumbling. I took my 7 photographs, the captured moments of my life in this house, and I laid them in the bottom of the trunk. The attic, my empty room, the Christmas tree, the kitchen. On top of them, I placed my grandfather's first 2 photos, his youthful adventure, his moment of terror. They were the bait. I doused the pile in lighter fluid, the acrid smell filling the air. Then I took the final photograph, the one of the creature, and held it in my hand. A shadow fell over the doorway to the living room. It was impossibly tall and thin, its form barely solid, like smoke clinging to a vaguely humanoid shape. It unfolded itself from the doorframe, its long, spider-like limbs moving with a silent, unnatural grace. I couldn't see a face, just that smooth, pale blankness I'd seen in the photograph, turned towards me. It took a step into the room, and another. The dripping from the ceiling quickened, the black puddle on the floor widening. It was coming for the photos, for its captured moments. My hand trembled as I struck a match. The flames sputtered to life. The creature paused, its blank head tilting. As it started towards me again, I tossed the match into the trunk. Whoosh! The photos and the lighter fluid erupted in a column of fire. The heat was intense, washing over my face. The creature recoiled, letting out a piercing, high-frequency shriek that vibrated in my bones. It was a sound of pure agony. The black stain on the ceiling began to bubble and hiss, raining down boiling black droplets that sizzled and evaporated in the fire's heat. The creature writhed, its smoky form flickering and distorting as the flames consumed the pictures. It was connected to them. Destroying them was destroying a part of it. But it wasn't enough. The fire was dying down as quickly as it had started, and the creature, though diminished, was reforming. Its shriek lowered to a guttural clicking, and it started to crawl towards me again, dragging its wounded, smoky body across the floor. It was now or never. With a yell that was more fear than courage, I lunged forward, clutching the last photograph, the one of the creature in the ship's hold. "Go home!" I screamed, and I threw the final photo into the heart of the dying flames. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The moment the old yellowed picture touched the embers, it didn't just burn. It imploded. A flash of blinding white light, just like the camera's flash but 1,000 times brighter, erupted from the trunk, throwing me backward onto the floor. A deafening ker-chunk. The sound of the camera's shutter echoed through the house, seeming to shake it to its very foundations. The creature shrieked, a sound of tearing metal and splitting reality, and it was sucked violently towards the fire, its smoky form unraveling like thread from a spool, pulled into the incandescent white light emanating from the burning photograph. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light vanished. The sound stopped. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the crackle of the last few embers in the trunk. The black stain on the ceiling was gone. The puddle on the floor had vanished. The air was still and warm again, smelling only of smoke and burnt paper. I lay on the floor gasping for breath, my body aching, my ears ringing. Cautiously, I pushed myself up and looked into the trunk. All that was left was a pile of fine, gray ash. The photos, mine and my grandfather's, were gone completely. I never went back upstairs. I grabbed my keys, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. I called my parents from a gas station 100 miles away and told them a fire had broken out in a trunk, but I'd put it out. I said the smoke damage was bad and that they should just let the new owners handle the final clean-out. They were confused, but I was adamant. I never wanted to set foot in that house again. I still have the camera, the Argenta Lux. It sits on a shelf in my apartment, a heavy, silent paperweight. Sometimes I pick it up. The lens is still a milky blind eye, and the film counter still reads 1010. I know I should get rid of it, throw it into the deepest part of the ocean, but I can't. It's a reminder that some doors should never be opened, and that every photograph isn't just a memory of the past. Sometimes it's a cage. And you have to be careful what you let out.